In the high valleys where old ways still govern daily life, there is a village built on a principle the modern world considers impossible. No one here owns land. Not the fields they farm, not the pastures where their animals graze, not the forests they harvest for timber, not even the ground beneath the houses they built with their own hands. For 400 years, every piece of earth in this village has belonged to no one and to everyone, held in common, worked collectively, and passed down not as private property but as shared inheritance. This is not a failed experiment. This is not a utopian fantasy that collapsed under its own contradictions. This is a living, functioning community that has survived wars, famines, economic transformations, and the rise of capitalism itself, without ever dividing its land into private plots. And against every expectation, against every assumption about human nature and economic necessity, it works. Understanding how requires forgetting almost everything the modern world teaches about land. In most places, land is property. It can be bought, sold, inherited, mortgaged, subdivided, and enclosed. Ownership gives you the right to exclude others, to profit from what the land produces, and to pass that profit to your children. The entire structure of modern economies rests on this idea. Land has value because it can be owned. Wealth accumulates because ownership allows you to capture the benefits of production. Inequality grows because some own more than others. But in this village, none of that is true. The land cannot be bought because it is not for sale. It cannot be sold because no one owns it. It cannot be inherited as private property because it belongs to the community as a whole. Every family has the right to use land, to work it, to benefit from it, but no family has the right to own it, to sell it, or to prevent others from accessing it when their need is greater. This system is called the commons, and it is one of the oldest forms of land management in human history. Long before capitalism, long before feudalism, long before kings and emperors claimed dominion over territory, human communities survived by holding resources collectively. No one owned the forest, but everyone could gather wood. No one owned the pasture, but everyone could graze their animals. No one owned the river, but everyone could fish. Survival depended not on excluding others, but on managing resources together so that everyone had enough and no one took too much. In most of the world, the commons were destroyed, enclosed by landlords, privatized by governments, sold to investors, turned into property that could be bought and sold and accumulated. The process took centuries, but the result was the same everywhere. Common land became private land. Shared resources became owned resources. Communities that had survived for generations by cooperating were replaced by individuals competing. But this village never enclosed. It never privatized. It never allowed land to become property. And the reasons why reveal something important about how commons actually function. The land here is not good land. It is not flat, fertile, or easy to work. It is steep, rocky, and prone to erosion. The growing season is short. The weather is unpredictable. The soil is thin. Under these conditions, individual farming would be almost impossible. A single family working a small private plot would struggle to produce enough to survive. The land is too marginal, the risks too high, the labor demands too intense. But worked collectively, the same difficult land becomes viable. Families pool labor during planting and harvest. They share tools, animals, and knowledge. They rotate fields so that no plot is exhausted. They manage water together so that everyone gets enough. They make decisions as a group about when to plant, what to plant, and how to protect crops from weather and pests. The work is still hard, but it is survivable because it is shared. This creates a fundamentally different relationship with land. In a system of private property, land is an asset. You work it to extract value. You improve it to increase its worth. You pass it to your children so they inherit wealth. The goal is accumulation. The better your land, the richer you become. The more land you own, the more power you have. In a common system, land is not an asset, it is a responsibility. You work it because you need to eat, and because the community depends on everyone contributing. You care for it not to increase its value, but to ensure it can continue feeding people after you are gone. You do not pass ownership to your children. You pass knowledge, and you pass the expectation that they will continue managing the land collectively, as you did, as your parents did, as the village has done for 4 centuries. This removes certain incentives that drive behavior in property-based systems. There is no reason to accumulate land, because you cannot own it. There is no reason to exploit it for maximum short-term profit, because you do not capture that profit individually. There is no reason to exclude others, because exclusion is not allowed. Instead, the incentives point toward cooperation, sustainability, and long-term thinking. But common systems do not run on goodwill alone. They require rules, strict rules. Rules about who can use what, when, and how much. Rules about labor contributions. Rules about decision-making. Rules about what happens when someone breaks the rules. Without these structures, commons collapse into what economists call the tragedy of the commons, where individuals overuse shared resources because they benefit personally, while the costs are shared collectively. This village has avoided that tragedy for 400 years by maintaining a governance system as old as the commons itself. Decisions about land use are made collectively in regular village assemblies where every household has a voice. Disputes are settled by elected councils. Labor obligations are enforced by social pressure, and, when necessary, by exclusion from future collective work. Families that do not contribute do not benefit. Families that overuse resources face collective sanction. The system is not voluntary. It is binding, enforced, and non-negotiable. The most important rule is this: no family can claim more land than it can work. This prevents accumulation. It ensures that land goes to those who need it and will use it, not to those who want to control it. When a family grows, they are allocated more land. When a family shrinks, their allocation is reduced. Land is distributed based on need and capacity, not inheritance or wealth. This creates a form of equality that property systems cannot achieve. In a village where no one owns land, no one can become a landlord. No family can grow wealthy by renting land to others. No one can sell their plot and move away with the profits. The economic floor and ceiling are much closer together than in societies organized around ownership. People are not equal in skill, effort, or intelligence, but they are roughly equal in access to the resource that determines survival, and that equality has persisted for 4 centuries. But equality does not mean uniformity. Families still control their own labor. They still make decisions about what to grow, how to grow it, and what to do with the harvest. The commons governs access to land, but not what happens on that land once it is allocated. A hard-working family that plants well and manages carefully will eat better than a family that does not. Effort still matters. Skill still matters. But the rewards of effort are capped by the fact that you cannot expand endlessly, because you cannot own endlessly. Children growing up in this system learn economics backward from how most people learn it. They do not learn that land is property. They learn that land is a shared resource. They do not learn that wealth comes from ownership. They learn that security comes from access and cooperation. They do not learn to see neighbors as competitors. They learn to see them as partners in survival. This creates a culture that feels alien to people raised in property-based societies. There is less individual ambition of the kind that drives people to acquire and accumulate. There is less competition for status based on wealth, because wealth cannot accumulate in the same way. There is less anxiety about losing what you own, because you do not own anything to lose. But there is also less mobility, less freedom to leave, less ability to opt out. The commons binds people to place and to each other in ways that ownership-based systems do not. In a property system, you can sell your land and start over somewhere else. You can walk away from a community that no longer serves you. You can take your wealth with you. In a common system, your relationship with the land is not transferable. You cannot sell what you do not own. If you leave with nothing. The land stays. The community stays. Your rights to use that land end the moment you stop working it. This makes departure costly in ways that go beyond economics. Leaving means severing your connection to the resource that sustains you. It means abandoning the relationships that give you access to collective labor, collective tools, and collective support. It means stepping out of a system designed for survival and into a world organized around principles that may not serve you as well. For centuries, this cost was enough to keep people in place. Departure was rare. The village remained stable. The system reproduced itself generation after generation. But in the last 50 years, that has started to change. The world outside the village has become more accessible. Roads have reached closer. Towns have grown larger. Wages have replaced barter. Education has opened doors that were once closed. And for the first time in the village's history, young people have real options beyond the commons. They can leave. They can earn money. They can own property. They can accumulate wealth in ways their parents never could. Some have left. Not many, but enough to notice. Enough to worry the elders. Enough to raise the question of whether the commons can survive when participation is no longer the only option. In the past, the system worked because everyone had to participate. There was no alternative. But now there is an alternative. And that changes everything. The commons was never designed to compete with capitalism. It was designed to function in the absence of capitalism. It solved problems that markets did not yet exist to solve. It provided security, stability, and survival in a world where land could not be bought or sold because money itself was scarce. But in a world where land has become property almost everywhere else, where ownership generates wealth, where wealth provides security, the commons begins to look like a limitation rather than a solution. Young people see this. They see that in towns, people own houses. They see that ownership creates independence. They see that money provides choices that collective labor does not. And some of them begin to ask why they should remain bound to a system that offers equality but limits mobility, that provides security but restricts accumulation, that values cooperation but constrains ambition. The elders have no easy answer to this. They can point to 400 years of survival. They can point to the stability the commons provides. They can point to the fact that no one in the village has ever been landless, homeless, or without the means to feed themselves. But they cannot promise wealth. They cannot promise ownership. They cannot promise the kind of individual freedom that property systems offer to those who succeed within them. And so, the village is at a crossroads. The system still works. The land is still held collectively. The assemblies still meet. The rules are still enforced. Families still plant, harvest, and survive together. But the certainty that this will continue indefinitely has weakened. The commons endures not because it has defeated the logic of private property, but because it exists in a place where private property has not yet fully arrived. If roads improve further, if towns grow closer, if wages rise higher, if the cost of leaving drops and the benefits of staying shrink, the commons may not survive another generation. Not because it failed, but because the world around it changed, and the people within it were given a choice they never had before. Or it may survive precisely because the world outside is becoming less stable. Property values fluctuate. Markets crash. Jobs disappear. Wealth concentrates in fewer hands, while more people struggle to afford land, housing, or security. In that context, a system that guarantees access to land, that distributes resources based on need, that provides collective support rather than individual competition, begins to look not like a relic, but like a refuge. The commons may be old, but the problems it solves are not. Inequality, landlessness, insecurity, exploitation. These are not problems of the past, they are problems of the present, and they are growing. And in this village, they do not exist. Not because the people here are wealthier, but because the system prevents them from emerging in the first place. No one owns land, so no one can be excluded from it. No one accumulates property, so no one becomes a landlord. No one profits from the labor of others, so exploitation is structurally impossible. The system is not perfect. It does not eliminate all inequality. It does not solve all problems, but it solves the problem of landlessness, and it has solved it for 400 years without interruption. That is not nothing. That is not a failure. That is a functioning alternative to a system most people assume is the only system possible. And it exists not in theory, not in a book, not in a failed utopian experiment, but in a real place, worked by real people, every single day. The fields are still farmed collectively. The pastures are still shared. The forests are still managed as common resources. The assemblies still meet to make decisions about planting, harvesting, and land allocation. The rules are still enforced. The system still works. And for now, no one owns the land. And it works. Whether it will work forever is uncertain. Whether it should be replicated elsewhere is debatable. But whether it is possible is not. This village is proof. Proof that land does not have to be property. Proof that commons can endure. Proof that collective ownership is not a fantasy, but a reality that has survived longer than most private estates, longer than most corporations, longer than most nations. It works because the people here decided, 400 years ago, that survival mattered more than ownership, that equality mattered more than accumulation, that community mattered more than competition. And then they built a system to make those values real. And they maintained it. And they are maintaining it still. Not because it is easy, not because it is perfect, but because it is theirs, all of theirs. And that has always been enough.